We've got the CII's newly appointed president, Naushad Forbes, who's joining in live here on the show. Mr. Forbes, good evening. Thanks so much for taking time out for us. Let's start by understanding, as you take charge of, presidentship at CII, what's the mood of corporate India, you think, on the state of the economy? Do you believe that to some extent there's been a reset of expectations, from industry, given what we've seen from the government over the last 2 years?
So I think expectations were very high of the new government 2 years ago, and I think many of those expectations have been met in terms of seeing a revival of momentum in the economy, seeing economic growth pick up over these 2 years, and our expectation indeed in the current year is that growth will pick up further, especially driven by a normal monsoon and a recovery in agriculture. But I think our expectations have to a large extent been met. We've been very pleased with many of the new initiatives. We think the Ease of Doing Business initiative is a wonderful initiative. It's an opportunity to truly address one of the fundamental problems which all industry in the country faces. We think the initiatives around startups and entrepreneurship is a wonderful initiative. We think the Make in India initiative has given new energy to the focus on manufacturing. All of these are very powerful initiatives. The Skills Initiative and the new Apprenticeship Act. These are all I think very long-term, powerful growth engines that have been added to the economy.
Right. If the mood is so upbeat, then why is it that corporates aren't quite investing? Even the budget, we know, had a massive public investment push. When do you think investment will indeed sort of begin to kick in and break ground?
It's a cycle. When we've had about 4 years, 5 years of relatively sluggish demand, and it's all going to rest on demand. So if you look over 4 or 5 years of relatively sluggish demand, we think demand has been growing maybe 2-3% a year in these 4 or 5 years. Meanwhile, companies that see relatively little in the way of demand growth work on their own internal efficiency, and so each year they become 5%, 7%, 8% more efficient. So they add that much capacity year on year on year. So over these 4 or 5 years, companies have maybe grown capacity by 30%, something like that on average. Demand has absorbed maybe 10% of that. So they've got this nice available capacity that still needs to be utilized before a fresh investment cycle will really be triggered. So I think demand growth has to happen first. We're starting to see the beginnings of that growth take place. As demand growth spreads through the economy to more and more sectors and increases in volume, then the investment cycle will start as firms start looking at fresh capacity enhancement.
Right. The other issue that has industry pretty worried is tax policy of this government, or should we just say tax terrorism? Despite all the talk and the rhetoric, the government, we know, has moved the Supreme Court in that 8,500 crore rupee transfer pricing case against Vodafone. How disappointed would you say industry is by this sort of action, and what's explaining this disconnect? Because we did hear quite the conciliatory tone in the budget.
Well, if you listen to our finance minister, he's been very clear in terms of his position, and this position has been backed up by many statements by the Prime Minister himself, where they've repeated that no new retrospective cases will be initiated, and everyone, domestic and foreign investor, should have complete confidence that there will be no retrospective claims raised. These are all old cases that continue to cause problems, and really they're very problematic for us as a country. The finance minister has pointed out that these claims have damaged our reputation worldwide as an investment destination and led to no revenue gain. So it's an own goal. It's you neither get the benefit of the extra revenue, nor do you get and you damage your reputation. So it makes the sooner we get beyond them and have no such cases coming up, the better.
Right. Given the back and forth in the goods and services tax, has the CII discounted a rollout of the GST by 2017?
So we're making no predictions about the timing of GST. It's important that it happen as quickly as possible. Our estimate in CII is that it will add about 1.5% to annual GDP growth. The sooner that 1.5%, which amounts to about $30 billion, will get added year on year to our GDP, the sooner it happens, the better for all of us in India. So it's something that we should be looking for and desiring as quickly as possible. As to timing, none of us are making any prediction about when GST will happen, but all of us are very confident it will happen at some point in time. Having said that, GST is the one issue because it's the one piece of legislation that is suffering from this political logjam. There are many other major changes that have taken place with actually bipartisan support. Those haven't been noticed, and I guess when there is bipartisan support, it doesn't make the news. So I would only encourage. We had an interaction at our annual CII session a few days ago with Mr. Anand Sharma, the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, and he pointed out that over the last year, over 50 pieces of legislation have been passed by the Rajya Sabha. So if it's passed in the Rajya Sabha, it's passed because of support indeed from the opposition. So we should look at those 50 pieces of legislation that have passed and then look for the GST also becoming a law, but recognize that it is this exceptional outlier that's been unfortunately caught in this political logjam.
Our last question for you then, what do you think should the government's approach be towards willful defaulters? We know that's something that's grabbing headlines of late. The Kingfisher case, the kind of national attention that it's got, and that's probably why you've got the regulatory and investigative agencies arguably sort of swinging into action. What should the government's approach to these sort of cases be, you think?
So I think it's, we should be clear about how we look at willful defaulters in terms of our perspective. And there are three ways we can look at it. We can look at it from a moral perspective, we can look at it from a business perspective, and we can look at it from a legal perspective. And I think our focus has to be the legal perspective. From a moral perspective, we can have our own individual views of what's right and wrong behavior. So if we see conspicuous consumption, then as an individual, we may not approve of the conspicuous consumption and we may not respect it. But that's a personal view. That's a personal choice of what we think is right or wrong. From a business perspective, going bust is not a crime. So if one goes bust, then there are, that's a part of taking a risk in business. And if one takes that risk, one should not be punished as a result of having taken that risk. That's the purpose of limited liability companies that have existed around the world for 300 years. The only issue that matters is the legal issue and the legal perspective. And the focus has to be on the legal perspective. Which laws were broken and what are we doing about the laws that were broken? So, if personal guarantees were given, those guarantees can be invoked. If they are not fulfilled, there is a legal process that needs to follow. That's what our focus should be. I'm not one who's in favor of trial by government, trial by media, trial by anyone, trial by other corporates. I'm only in favor of trial by courts.
Sure. Thanks so much for that. Naushad Forbes, the newly appointed president of CII, speaking only and exclusively.
Thank you very much, Sandeep. Thank you.
Thank you. Here on ET Now.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/ETNow and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at ETNowLive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/user/ETNow.